Welcome to my channel, Delightful Stories. I'll be happy if you subscribe to my channel and like it. Enjoy watching and don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments about the story. The road leading through the woods from the village to the main highway was in fairly decent condition, but Alex, who was sitting behind the wheel, did not press on the gas. Even though the curves of the asphalt roadway were not too sharp, he, as an experienced driver, was well aware of how sad the consequences of a sudden appearance of a wild animal in front of the car could be. So the man drove the passenger to a cozy little village and leisurely returned to town. In addition, it was quite possible to finish the orders for today because this one went surprisingly smoothly and brought excellent tips, the amount quite comparable to the cost of the trip. The elderly passenger, who was carefully helped into the car by a restless young girl, turned out to be a remarkably pleasant person. At first, the lady, to whom the word old lady did not suit at all, was reading something on her smartphone, and then she began to look thoughtfully at the landscape, sweeping behind the cab window. For the sake of entertainment, the driver sometimes tried to guess the occupation of the person he was helping to travel comfortably in the car. Of course, such distraction from the road did not happen too often, but when the situation allowed, the driver allowed himself an innocent pastime and often proved right in his guesses. And so today, peering surreptitiously at the passenger, he began to speculate. The clothes looked nice and fairly new. Her hair was immaculate and kept its shape even after she had thrown back the hood of her light cloak. Her makeup was understated, and she had a peculiarly straight posture. The woman noticed that the cab driver was watching her and stared straight at him, as if looking right into his soul. Alex felt uncomfortable and hastily clarified. Maybe the stove should be turned up, or, on the contrary, turned down? Well, formed voice of the passenger sounded softly, but clearly and distinctly. Thank you. Everything is fine. He longed to ask who she was, the woman with the royal posture. The man thought that the passenger, like his mother, had devoted many years of his life to the difficult work of a teacher. Only the honor and fussy subservience shown by the young attendant hinted at a higher status. Could it be that the elderly lady had advanced up the career ladder to the position of school director, or was a famous actress or singer in the past? However, it was as if the sight of this passenger rejected the possibility in advance. From the beginning, the driver thought that the passenger was a retired judge. The cab driver had already encountered people of this profession in his life, and frankly, he did not like them. They ruled the fates, often without delving into the circumstances of cases, acting quite unfairly and covering everything with numbers, articles, laws, thinking themselves gods, no less. When the lady first came out of the porch, she seemed to him haughty, and the driver even felt something very close to dislike. However, very soon Alex's impression changed to the opposite. Observing the behavior of the passenger, he realized that she was sharply different from those to whom everyone around him is forever obliged. The woman gently reassured the fidgety assistant, who had managed to drop one of the bulky bags. The lady, in addition, politely greeted him, which not all customers condescend to, and then wished the remaining assistant a good end of the day. It would seem that this was a trifle, a display of basic politeness and nothing more. But the driver was pleased with these details. At the end of the trip, which had passed in almost total silence when the car was on its way through the village, approaching its destination, the man I saw the mischievous smile that flashed on the passenger's lips and instantly transformed her face. The car drove past a child with a shaggy dog on a leash who was walking along the curb. The couple, clearly pleased with each other's company, evidently were either familiar to the lady or evoked some pleasant memories for her. Having parked the car at the indicated place, the man helped the passenger to get the things out of the trunk and was about to offer to bring them up, but a very young guy who ran out of the gate overtook him. The young man gave the cab driver an unpleasant look and began to pull out the bags. The lady handed the man a few bills and thanked him evidently from her heart. Thank you. What a wonderful trip. You drive it very well, as if you feel it as a living creature. Honesty did not allow him to take the outstretched money. He reported, "Actually, your trip has already been paid for." "So good day to you." The woman smiled. "I know. It's for you personally. Do with it as you see fit. Go home early, get some rest, or whatever." The nimble young man was still casting suspicious glances at Alex. In the meantime, he carried all the belongings and respectfully held out his hand to help the lady down the steps. The passenger once more offered to the driver, Take it. In fact, it would be fun if you could help someone in need get where they need to go. Good luck with that." Alex did not refuse, and after thanking the woman, said goodbye and drove away. Dusk was still beginning to thicken. After the recent rain, the road was slightly gleaming. There was no point in pushing the car hard, the gas pedal to the floor. No one was waiting for him at the rented apartment. His mother lived in another city and flatly refused to move, as if she had put down roots in her job at the school. They had been promising to renovate it for years, but the amount of work was so great that even over the summer vacation, it was impossible to cope. So it turned out that in some rooms, his mom literally knew every nail in the face. After all, she and her colleagues and parents, many of whom happened to teach, repaired the classrooms and hallways, not relying on the generosity of superiors. Mom had long hinted to her only son to move in with her, but he was ashamed to go back. It seemed to him that everyone there would teach and remind him of what he himself had tried so hard to forget. Indeed, how can one be proud of such a sad experience? Especially when your mother had spent her whole life teaching her children the good, the bright, the eternal. These thoughts, once again appearing uninvited in his head, made the cab driver's mood worsen, because he did not get there because he was a criminal. He had done no harm to anyone. His only fault was his overconfidence. How proud his mother, father, and wife had been when he had managed to get a job in a bank after graduation, and what a grief that supposed good fortune had been for their family. He carefully delved into all the nuances of work and acted strictly according to job description, but did not notice how he became the only suspect in the organization of a large-scale crime. The cunning manager managed to twist the investigation so that he himself would be unpunished. And Alex failed to prove his innocence. The lawyer tried to build a line of defense, but to no avail. The father died of a heart attack shortly after learning of the verdict for his only son. His wife, the adoring Cusha, decided to divorce him. Only his mother waited for him and fought for her son to leave the walls of prison as soon as possible. After Alex was released from prison, of course, it was not easy. He was not allowed to get a good job and had to make odd jobs from time to time. I then decided that his only hope for stability and financial independence was his ability to drive. Thanks to his father, who had been teaching him the tricks of driving and car care since he was almost school age. After obtaining a new license to replace his expired license, the hapless bank clerk and former prisoner became a cab driver. Relationships with women somehow did not pan out, and at 30 the man became an avid bachelor. It was impossible to classify him as a promising suitor because he certainly could not boast of wealth. In addition, he did not want to search for his happiness. The old betrayal of his wife was still an open wound. Little love adventures, if there were any, ended in parting. About his loneliness, he did not feel too crushed. His mother, who was rapidly losing her health, was the only person for whom he now lived. Alex sent her money regularly, and in the fall, he came to help buy vegetables for the winter. It had only been a couple of weeks since he'd parted from his mother after another brief encounter. But the man was desperately bored again. How good and peaceful he felt when she stroked his head as if in passing, or carefully adjusted his blanket when he was on the verge of being awake and asleep. But to stay in his hometown and have everyone point the finger at his mother or himself, Alex couldn't afford it. He was afraid that he would snap, punish the gossipers and abusers, and go back to prison. No, it was better to come for a few days and then hide from gossip and anxious glances in a foreign spirit and mood megalopolis where no one was interested. Here, even the neighbors on the landing, nothing is known. And he was unspeakably happy and completely satisfied. Chasing away the memories, the cab driver tried to switch to other thoughts, but there were practically no positive ones. The leisurely return to the city disposes him to think about the incidents that had happened to him during the years he had worked as a taxi driver. Not all of the passengers were as benign as the elegant lady who had recently left the cab driver's cabin. Things had happened. They had been stolen. They had not paid for the ride, and they had simply run away. The stretch of road through the woods had long since ended. A little longer and ahead would appear a series of dacha areas, which were especially picturesque in the spring and early fall. Almost immediately behind them, about 15 minutes leisurely ride, would be the house in which he rented an apartment. It wasn't long ago that there was incredibly heavy traffic. But now that the crops were almost all harvested and only a few late apples were hanging, the cottages looked abandoned and desolate, and the road was almost empty. He wanted to hurry through these unhappy places, but suddenly, as he passed one of the stops, he noticed a figure lying on a bench. Next to it was a wheeled cart, a sure sign of experienced gardeners who, like industrious ants, hauled their crops from the dachas to their city apartments. The cab driver did not consider himself an evil man, but he caught himself thinking that the first thing he wanted to do was to step on the gas pedal, but he figured that the season when they start public transport to the dachas had already ended. Realizing that the stranger couldn't hope for a shuttle bus to arrive, he gently slowed down. The man parked the car on the side of the road to see if the man felt ill, needed medical attention, or just needed to get to town. After all, no one was waiting for him at home. Alex got out of the car and stretched his stiff legs. He approached the bench. For a second, the cab driver became uncomfortable because the man did not respond in any way to the knocking of the door or the sound of his footsteps. "Hey, buddy. Okay, alive or what?" Was the body moved? Then the man turned, sat down on the bench, and looked at the cab driver. Alex saw before him not a man at all, but a rather young girl, and began to consider the stranger with surprise. Her clothes were even worse than those in which dacha dwellers dress up to visit their lawful plots, and were more like the attire of a scarecrow. She was wearing an old-fashioned jacket, which had been fashionable about 30 years ago, which was obviously too big for her, and her hat, pulled low over her forehead, looked visibly shabby. The sneakers, which had obviously seen a lot in their day, completed the look. All in all, she looked like a tramp or a beggar, like those who sit at church gates. Alex was in no hurry to jump to conclusions. Who knows what could have happened to the girl's normal clothes? Maybe she had to wear things exiled to the summer house due to some insurmountable circumstance. There was no smell of booze. In fact, the stranger's eyes were too clear. Trying not to frighten her, Alex spoke soothingly. I don't know whether you know it or not, but there's definitely not going to be a summer bus. I almost listen to the radio all the time, and they said on the news that the season is over. So if you're headed toward town, I can give you a ride. There was a distinct fear in the stranger's eyes, and at the same time, a desire to be as soon as possible in a place cozier than this wind-blown bus stop. In a husky voice, the girl admitted that it would be nice to get to town. "But I only have money for a loaf of bread. You can't pay." Alex barely restrained himself from laughing at the amazing coincidence, and hurried to explain the situation to the stranger, who seemed to run away now. "Wherever you can see, by a happy coincidence, it turned out that your trip has already been paid for by my recent passenger, especially since I'm going into town myself. Not everything is measured in money. Sometimes it's not shameful to show humanity. Why not give you a lift on your way?" The glance of the girl was still incredulous, and the man, who himself already wanted to hurry home and not to stand on the highway, experiencing the gusts of wind, was waiting for a decision. Anyway, you decide whether you're coming or not. I'm not going to hurt you in any way, by the way. If you believe me, let's get in the car and go. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Maybe some kind driver will feel sorry for you. The stranger rose sharply from the bench, picked up her wheeled bag, and replied to the cab driver, "I'm ready." On the way to the car, he noticed that his companion was visibly cold, though maybe the shiver was her excitement. The cab driver didn't try to find out the reason, but simply turned on the heater and concentrated on the road. The passenger, who was sitting in the front seat next to him, stowed her bag in her feet, fastened her seatbelt, and as if disconnected from reality. Alex did not bother to talk to the stranger. She was silent too, and only when the car was about to enter the city, the man clarified, "Where shall I take you?" The girl flinched as if from a nap, and after a few seconds she obviously thought something over, replied, "There's a 24-hour stall coming up and I can get out. Or if you don't mind, turn right and I'll be there in 2 blocks. Alex was a little confused about the destination. As far as he understood his passenger, she was going to one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods. The block was built up with barracks, which had been erected, as it were, for the construction of a number of factories. They had lasted much longer than planned, but were now living out their last days. Most of the tenants were glad to leave the houses with Alex called out, "You're doing all right. Okay, alive or what?" The body moved. Then the man turned, sat down on the bench, and looked at the cab driver. Alex saw before him not a man at all, but a rather young girl, and began to consider the stranger with surprise. Her clothes were even worse than those in which dacha dwellers dress up to visit their lawful plots, and were more like the attire of a scarecrow. She was wearing an old-fashioned jacket, which had been fashionable about 30 years ago, which was obviously too big for her, and her hat, pulled low over her forehead, looked visibly shabby. The sneakers, which had obviously seen a lot in their day, completed the look. All in all, she looked like a tramp or a beggar, like those who sit at church gates. Alex was in no hurry to jump to conclusions. Who knows what could have happened to the girl's normal clothes? Maybe she had to wear things exiled to the summer house due to some insurmountable circumstance. There was no smell of booze. In fact, the stranger's eyes were too clear. Trying not to frighten her, Alex spoke soothingly. I don't know whether you know it or not, but there's definitely not going to be a summer bus. I almost listen to the radio all the time, and they said on the news that the season is over. So if you're headed toward town, I can give you a ride." There was a distinct fear in the stranger's eyes, and at the same time, a desire to be as soon as possible in a place cozier than this wind-blown bus stop. In a husky voice, the girl admitted that it would be nice to get to town. "But I only have money for a loaf of bread. You can't pay." Alex barely restrained himself from laughing at the amazing coincidence, and hurried to explain the situation to the stranger, who seemed to run away now. "Wherever you can see, by a happy coincidence it turned out that your trip has already been paid for by my recent passenger, especially since I'm going into town myself. Not everything is measured in money. Sometimes it's not shameful to show humanity. Why not give you a lift on your way?" The glance of the girl was still incredulous, and the man, who himself already wanted to hurry home and not to stand on the highway, experiencing the gusts of wind, was waiting for a decision. Anyway, you decide whether you're coming or not. I'm not going to hurt you in any way, by the way. If you believe me, let's get in the car and go. If you don't want to, you don't have to. Maybe some kind driver will feel sorry for you. The stranger rose sharply from the bench, picked up her wheeled bag, and replied to the cab driver, "I'm ready." On the way to the car, he noticed that his companion was visibly cold, though maybe the shiver was her excitement. The cab driver didn't try to find out the reason, but simply turned on the heater and concentrated on the road. The passenger, who was sitting in the front seat next to him, stowed her bag in her feet, fastened her seatbelt, and as if disconnected from reality. Alex did not bother to talk to the stranger. She was silent too, and only when the car was about to enter the city, the man clarified. "Where shall I take you?" The girl flinched as if from a nap, and after a few seconds she obviously thought something over, replied, "There's a 24-hour stall coming up and I can get out. Or if you don't mind, turn right and I'll be there in 2 blocks. Alex was a little confused about the destination. As far as he understood as passenger, she was going to one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods. The block was built up with barracks, which had been erected, as it were, for the construction of a number of factories. They had lasted much longer than planned, but were now living out their last days. Most of the tenants were glad to leave the houses with minimal conveniences. Judging by the numerous barracks with burned-out roofs, central heating had already been cut off, and the houses went to people who simply had nowhere else to live. The inhabitants of this neighborhood hardly ever used cabs unless they were plotting to steal the proceeds. Strangely enough, the girl didn't look like a criminal or a social lowlife. Literate speech, noticeable even in short remarks, clearly honed to automatism, traffic rules, technique, and manners in general, indicated that the passenger is unlikely to be a native of this suburb. Having decided that if I was going to do good, Alex did not slow down at the stall. Obeying the girl's instructions, he took her where she asked. The man's astonishment was boundless. The place where his passenger wanted to go turned out to be not even a house, but actually a ruin. A woman whose clothes looked even worse than the passengers emerged from behind a lopsided door, apparently upon hearing the noise of the car. The girl quickly said a word of thanks and slipped out of the car. The cab driver was already ready to start from his seat when suddenly he saw the woman slapping his recent passenger on the cheeks. Then the resident of the dilapidated building began pulling her bag on herself with one hand without stopping the slaps. The girl made no attempt to defend herself actively and simply rolled backward, but did not let go of her burden. Sighing and mentally cursing himself, the man got out of the car, took a crowbar with him, and went to rescue the girl. She did not even seem to react to the appearance of her volunteer protector, but the woman with the dirty, battered face began swearing at the man, generously incorporating into her curses the lingo common to people who have been in prison. Here was the first time he was glad that he himself had passed the test of a prison term. Quickly explaining to the fierce woman that she was wrong, the man asked the girl, "So, are you staying here, or are we going to keep going?" The young stranger snatched her bag from her hands and walked toward her car. Alex followed her, but, expecting anything, turned around several times. The precautions, fortunately, proved unnecessary, and soon the cab calmly left the place. The girl did not cry, but sat tense and occasionally flinched when the car bounced. Silently handing the passenger some wet wipes, Alex concentrated on the road and then offered, "There's a social shelter across town. There they help people who find themselves in difficult circumstances. If you want, I can take you there. It's true that they have strict rules, but every point is perfectly fair. Of course, you can't bring any booze with you. That's the most important condition. And they'll keep you busy too. But at the same time, there is no need to pay money. All financial contributions are purely on a voluntary basis, and you can make them even after a difficult period of life is behind you. They were a great help to me in my time. If not for their support, I would have hardly been able to get out of the pit of life quickly." The passenger whispered the answer so softly the driver could not hear it and asked again, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand." The girl repeated, but louder, "You're tired, so don't think about me. Just give me the address of this shelter. I'll get there myself." He looked at his watch and began to speak his thoughts aloud. "Of course, I could invite you to my place without any unnecessary thoughts, but I live in a rented apartment, and the owner strictly forbade to bring outsiders without his prior approval of the candidates. Listen, Why don't I take you to the shelter? There is, of course, a man on duty at the shelter. And if you're lucky, maybe someone you know will be there to help you get processed. Do you have documents? The girl nodded, almost intact with the dog on the dashboard, and began to confusedly thank, knowing that the kindness of the cab driver has long gone beyond a simple desire to give a hitchhiker. Interrupting the flow of thanks, the cab driver inquired, "Hey, what's your name?" "Jane," the passenger whispered. "And I'm Alex. That's how we met. So excuse me for prying, but I'm going to ask you a question that worries me. What sins have you just been slapped for?" Even in the coming darkness, slightly dispersed only by the glowing instruments in the cabin, you could see how embarrassed the girl. It's a long explanation, and in short, I didn't bring any money or groceries. In fact, I left with my documents, which is strictly forbidden. I do not understand why I went back there. Puzzled, the man asked, "Is it your home there or some kind of voluntary slavery?" He did not wait for an answer because the girl was crying. In silence, interrupted by sobs, the cab driver parked in front of the store and turned to his passenger. "And I'll quickly go to the grocery store. It is not convenient to go there empty-handed. Help is always welcome." It seemed that the fellow traveler didn't even pay attention to Alex's words. He returned, loaded packages on the back seat, and the girl had already calmed down and even apologized. "I'm sorry, I don't seem to have the best nerve." The cab driver nodded in understanding, and when he drove her to the well-known shelter, he decided to bother her again. "Okay, we're there. Let's go get your bag and get you settled in for the night. Then you can decide for yourself where to go." To the man's delight, his kind friend was on duty at the shelter that evening. An elderly woman hospitably opened the door and warmly greeted the former ward. "It's been a long time. What brings you here? Do you still work as a cab driver? Aren't you bored? Come in, darling. I was just making some tea. Not in a hurry. Sit with the old lady, tell her how it's going." Alex, putting the filled bags on the floor, firmly hugged the woman who always treated him maternally, and she, still continuing to talk, noticed the crying girl behind the open door and stretched out. "Yes, I can see that you didn't just come by to check on me, or to bring you some goodies. Come on, don't get in the way. Come in and tell me what's wrong." The cab driver introduced his passenger to the woman on duty at the shelter. "Here, this is our Emily. That's lucky. Although all the people here are wonderful, but I'll tell you a secret, Emily is the best. For her, there are no unsolvable problems, and she always finds the words of wisdom to support and comfort. Emily. I just met her today, but as far as I can tell, she clearly needs a roof over her head, at least for today. And of course, your advice, as always, will come in handy." The shelter lady on duty escorted the guests to the kitchen, and sorting out the packages they had brought, had time to run errands for Alex and Jane. "Valia, if there are documents, let me see them. And you take a set of clothes for Jane in the storeroom and show me where you can wash. And if you want, you can also take a shower." While Jane cleaned herself up, Emily, with the help of Alex, set the table, persuading her former ward to have dinner as well. Having washed and changed, Jane was even more youthful than in her oversized clothes, which the manager, with her permission, had already taken to a small room equipped as a laundry room. The girl's passport said she was only 18, but she did not look her age. The overly curious inmates of the orphanage crowded into the kitchen to see who had come to visit so late. Emily gently sent them off to their rooms. When the guests were full, Emily tactfully clarified, "Jane, I understand that you're not feeling too comfortable right now. Do you think I'm going to interrogate you? But believe me, you have the right to tell me as much as you think necessary. If you don't want to say anything at all, that's okay. Sometimes it takes time." However, it sounded as if she wanted to say something of her own accord. But she began her story by thanking Alex. "Thank you for picking me up at the bus stop." And then, after seeing the ugly scene, did not leave me to my fate. "I was brought here where I finally made myself look human. Even at the bus stop, I decided that it was better for them to die here than to continue to live such a senseless life. And here you, like an angel, although I did not deserve salvation. I went to that dacha for a reason. I thought there was no one there, and I got caught. It's good that the women didn't call the police when they detained me. They let me go in peace. They even gave me some apples, but strictly ordered me not to come back to the compound. So I lay down on the bench, and I was burning with shame, even though the weather was not hot at all. It was terribly embarrassing for the fate that I had derailed with my own hand. Emily, who has listened to more than 100 heartfelt confessions, was silent, knowing that the girl is about to reveal the details of how she became a vagrant. Alex, on the other hand, decided to encourage her with words and cheer her up. "So you're still very young. There is time to set things right." But the cab driver's words had an unexpected effect on Jane. She cried, but without hysterical sobs, and then explained, "I have already regretted 1,000 times the things I did 6 months ago. It all started when I met Robert. A funny, charming guy. That's what I thought at the time. He would meet me after classes at the institute, and while walking home he entertained me so much that my stomach ached with laughter afterwards. I fell madly in love with him. I started skipping school. What could I do when spring was raging and a guy was asking me to go out with him? Of course, my parents strongly discouraged Robert. My father said that my lover was a shady guy, asking for time to gather all the available information about him and a little more. My mother also begged me to listen to my father's idea, claimed that she had bad feelings and that my obsession disturbed her, hinted and even told me directly that he was an Alphonse and would break my heart by betraying me. But I believed only the man I loved. Robert told me so convincingly that he loved me. Of course, I believed him. Not my parents' suspicions. There was a shred of doubt, but I was quick to dispel it. In response to my direct question about whether his interest in me was self-serving, he even took offense and disappeared for a few days. I suffered so much that as soon as he reappeared, apologized, and started kissing me, I fell even more in love with him. My lover and I started seeing each other in secret because he lived in the dormitory and had nowhere else to take me. Getting to know my parents was out of the question. They lived in another region, and my lover planned that when he had a vacation, we would go to them together. In my hometown, I was terrified of appearing in public with him, lest my parents find out about the continuation of the relationship. Only my mother's old friend supported us, even provided her apartment for my dates, saying that I was old enough to build my own life. The secret of secret meetings didn't last long. One day I came home, and I was told in an ultimatum that this connection must be cut off. I did not give in. Our apartment was increasingly full of quarrels and the stifling smell of sedative. However, I appeared less and less often, sometimes only to spend the night if my friend's apartment was unoccupied. My mother gave me a scandal. My father threatened to deprive me of financial support, and I was already full of plans for family life with her boyfriend. Once, after another argument with my parents, I began to complain to the only person who understood me, and my mother's friend. Then she said with indignation that my mom and dad have no right to interfere in my life because they are not related to me, and told me that they, after a personal tragedy, adopted me at age 3 for a bag of flour and a few pounds of meat, buying me out of some mother of many children. I was hysterical after this unexpected news. It became clear that the strange dreams about a huge family and childhood pranks were just memories. It turned out that I just remembered being punished for my older sister's awkwardness, spilling grits all over the kitchen and blaming it on me. I was telling my mom about it. Well, the woman who raised me, and she convinced me it was just a dream. Telling Anne all this, I was crying, and she stroked my head, comforted me, told me that I was not a toy for the people who raised me and had a right to happiness with the person I loved. Convinced me that I was old enough to have a serious conversation with my foster parents, and it was time to figure things out and live my life. How betrayed and hurt I felt. How could I? After all, not only had my parents lied to me all my life, but now they wanted to rob me of my love. They bought me out as a toy and kept me away from my own mother, playing the role of benefactors. What I was thinking, I do not know, but obviously not my brain. I came to the apartment where my childhood had passed, and instead of having a quiet conversation, I began to reproach those whom I thought were my parents and curse them for lying. My mother cried softly, repeating that she had always wished me nothing but good. Dad sat there with a pale face, and then went into the kitchen, so he probably didn't have to listen to my accusations. The woman who had taken me to daycare, treated me, taught me lessons, had tears rolling down her cheeks, but those incessant drops didn't touch me at all. I managed to find out from her the address of my real mother. My father came back with 2 glasses filled with stinky liquid that reeked of valerian, and almost forced us to drink the sedatives. I kept playing accuser. I yelled that they were used to buying everything, but that money didn't make them gods who were allowed to decide everything for others. My mom calmed me down somehow. Maybe the sedative was having an effect. I turned around and went to my room. That was the last night I saw the people who had raised me. At night I packed up some of my things, all the jewelry I'd given, and for what I now regret, I took the money. My parents never hid their savings from me. They trusted me. At that time, I even justified myself that it was moral compensation for their lies and interference in my relationship. Without even leaving a note, I left the apartment. I had 2 goals: to find my birth mother and to start a happy new life with her, my brothers and sisters who had been separated from me, and, of course, with Robert. I wasn't even afraid of the prospect of moving to another city. I believed that my beloved would find work anywhere, and I didn't feel bad about giving up my studies. Why would I need a degree if I had to sacrifice love for it? I was sure he would support me. I called him and we met. I confusedly explained what happened and invited him to come with me to search for my biological mother, to support me in a difficult moment. But he said, apologetically, that he just had to be at work in the next few days, comforting me. He promised that he would be in touch all the time, and we also agreed that he would look for a rented apartment for us out of my parents' money. I left some for the road and gave the rest of the rather large sum and a bag of jewelry, so as not to lose it, to the guy. After a heated embrace, we parted. How much and how many ways I had to find my birth mother is a long story. Fortunately, I had money, and I rented a room in a nice, cozy hostel. I called the guy every day. He sent me photos of apartments for approval, but we talked for a few minutes at a time. My lover explained everything by hard work and laborious selection of our future family nest. And I, tired of the fruitless search, was not the best conversationalist. My birth mother, as it turned out, had managed to change her place of residence several times. And, of course, I noticed that the neighborhoods became less and less prestigious with each move she made. After about a week of searching, I reached that dilapidated house where you dropped me off today. I achieved my goal and finally met my birth mother. Strangely enough, she recognized me immediately when she opened the door. "My golden bead!" when she opened the door. "My golden bead!" she shouted. "My darling child! I've been waiting for you to find me one day!" We cried for a long time sitting in her arms and couldn't get enough of talking. My mother confessed that she considered her separation from me to be the worst mistake she had ever made, the price she had had to pay for it to be unbearable. She didn't go into detail, but it was obvious that she was addicted to booze. When Mom confessed that none of my 2 brothers and 3 sisters were in touch with her, I, of course, immediately offered to move in with me. Mom agreed. In my joy, I told him about the long-awaited meeting and asked him to look for a bigger apartment. He seemed to share my emotions, congratulated, rejoiced, and the next day he stopped contacting me. It was impossible to reach him, and I was worried that something had happened to him. I didn't have any particularly trusted friends, so I called Anne. But instead of support and help, I got a portion of reproaches and accusations. A friend of my foster mom told me that tragedy had struck. The man I thought was my dad had suffered a stroke and was in the hospital. Anne told me about the circumstances that led to his stroke. It turns out he had gone to the police to report me for theft, but he drove into a tree on the way. My foster father instantly got sick. Fortunately, the speed was low and there were no more victims. Anne told me that her friend, my foster mother, called me an ungrateful creature, a creep who ruined my entire well-being. I didn't have the strength to object. Deep down, I knew that all the insults were absolutely deserved. I asked Anne for the number of the hospital, but she strictly forbade me not only to appear in town, but even to contact my foster mother. She claimed that it would only make things worse and could deprive her friend of her health as well. Begged me not to call my foster mother, lest she be sent to a hospital bed or to the grave as well. When she heard me sobbing on the phone, Anne relented and promised to let me know when the situation was more favorable. She also agreed to go to my lover's dorm to see if anything bad had happened to him. I waited for the news as on needles. Soon I heard from Anne that he had been offered a lucrative 6-month assignment, and he left, leaving some of his belongings behind. I calmed down a little. So everything was okay with my lover, and anything could have happened to my phone. I have been calling Anne about once a month for 6 months now, but I get requests from her not to disturb the people I have so disappointed. I ask her to tell her on my behalf that I'm sorry, but she says I am not forgiven yet. I ask her if I can come, and she answers that it's too soon. My adoptive father needs to get stronger, and my mother needs to calm down. He still hasn't contacted me, though. By my count, he should be back by now. I confess I already suspected that he would never show up. The idea that he had turned out to be a crook and that he had embezzled the money and jewels he had received from me and had simply decided to cheat me. Not only that, but my relationship with my birth mother began to deteriorate as I ran out of money. I sold my smartphone and bought a simple phone in return, but of course that wasn't enough. The biological mother is working without a job, or rather, she tries to work until she gets kicked out for absenteeism. So she set me up to sort of fill in for her. Also, we started fighting because her roommate started drooling over me. So she's trying to see less of me at home. And today she sent me to the cottage to clean up everything that is bad. The fact that I came in a car drove my mother out of her mind, and you witnessed this ugly scene. She slapped me when she heard that I had nothing to take from the dacha, began to take away my bag, and I had my phone and passport in it. So I clung to it like a drowning man to a straw. These things were my last hope for things to work out, my last link to the people who were really close to me. It's a good thing you didn't leave and get me out of there. I realized myself how wrong I was when I took money from people from whom I saw nothing but kindness and care. It turns out that they were right about Robert too. I am sorry that I did not believe them and was so traumatized by my action. It was all my own fault, but to punish them for their kindness was so unfair. If I had been a little braver, I would have been on my knees begging for forgiveness. But I'm afraid that they have really cut me out of their lives and do not want to see me. But I'm even more afraid that my appearance will make my dad worse. The more that I cannot return the money. She was silent. Alex did not say anything either. The headmistress shook her head and did not start a ceremony. Yes, girl, you have done things. But I do not judge. You're young. And being in love sometimes makes even much wiser people do things like that. You know, it's absolutely right that you want to ask people for forgiveness. I understand that you are afraid of their reaction. But it's better to apologize in person than to justify yourself through someone else, even a family friend. It is not the right thing to torture people and not understand how to live your life. As I understand it, it is necessary to save your biological mother from alcohol. But unfortunately, it is impossible to help someone who does not want it, to make him take care of his health against his will. It is a lost cause. Here in the cup there is aromatic tea. Emily turned to Alex. Alex, tomorrow you have to go on shift. Understanding what the shelter duty woman was getting at, the cab driver completed her thought by suggesting, how would you feel about going to your town tomorrow morning without putting it off for a long time, especially since tomorrow is Saturday? Do you think your parents will be home? The confused girl could not believe that. Right now, she had a chance to try to correct a mistake she had made, so she nodded silently. The headmistress smiled quite a bit and suggested, well, if you have to go to another city, then you should have time to rest. So come on, I'll arrange sleeping places for you. Alex, I suggest you stay too. You'll find a place to sleep, at least here on the couch in the break room. Or are you going to your place? The driver thought it over and decided to stay in the shelter. We'll leave tomorrow morning. I don't see the point in me driving back and forth through the city, so I'll take you up on your kind offer. It seemed to the girl like a miracle she no longer believed in. The woman on duty at the shelter put her up for the night and went back to the man. As much as he wanted to talk more with the wise woman, she firmly ordered him to rest. You know I'd love to talk to you, but you have to leave tomorrow. If it's not too much trouble, you'd better back the girl up. Well, the fact that she believed a scoundrel and a man, that's every other girl in our orphanage like that. And the story about the money she took from her foster parents will be more serious. One thing I will say is that it was good that she told it herself, without being embarrassed, although there was nothing easier than to keep quiet about it and create such a white and fluffy image. So she's a good girl, you look at her. The man just brushed her off. Oh, you always need someone to join you. I have a past in prison, you know. And the difference in our age is almost 12 years. No, she's beautiful, but not for me, unequivocally. And after the divorce with his wife, I cannot find the strength to go back to the female sex. The woman blushed with indignation and began playfully reprimanding the former ward. You, my friend, the entire female sex is not offended. And in general, go and rest. Tomorrow morning I'll feed you and go. He had no choice but to obey. In the morning the girl was incredibly nervous and only by some miracle managed not to spill the hot tea served for breakfast on herself. Poor thing, sorry, poor thing, thought the man, but he did not know how to support his occasional companion who suddenly intruded into his life so abruptly. The man was aware that he did not have any romantic feelings for the girl, who frankly told him about his ridiculous love. But for some reason, he really wanted to help her. The cab driver called the dispatcher to explain that he would not be at work. And after a quick tidy up and devouring a delicious breakfast, he took the fugitive to her foster parent. The cab driver did not interfere with the girl's conversations and only asked if she would mind a softly turned on radio. The hour-and-a-half drive passed in a silence that reflected her tension. The driver saw that she doubted the rightness of her intended visit and suggested, if it's appropriate, I can go with you, sort of as moral support. I promise I'll be there for you. The girl's eyes even sparkled. Of course, I'm an adult, and I'm the only one responsible for my transgression. But really, I would be very grateful if you were there for me. It's not that I'm going to defend myself against the righteous anger of Mom and Dad with your help. It's just that I'm afraid, as Anne warned me, that one of them might get hurt. In that case, your help would be invaluable in getting them to the hospital quickly. Alex saw the girl's hand shake as she pressed the intercom button. Probably, if it weren't for his presence, she would have scurried away, hearing from the speaker a woman's voice. Who? The girl went pale for a moment. Mom, it's me. Can you let me in? The voice on the speaker rang with joy. My girl, come in quick. The door opened, and Alex followed his companion, who did not wait for the elevator, and jumped over the stairs, eager to get as quickly as possible to the people whom she did not seem to stop loving. On the fourth-floor landing, the girl literally ran into the arms of a weeping woman and a man who was gently supporting her by the waist. For the next few seconds, only isolated words could be heard. Valia, Mama, Papa, in different variations. He felt uncomfortable, and then the man, who appeared to be the foster father, turned his attention to him. As if coming to his senses, he called everyone into the apartment. "Ladies and young man, let's go." The cab driver was embarrassed and touched by the family scene. There was no chance to refuse because he promised the girl to stay near the stairwell. The whole group moved into the cozy and spacious apartment. The woman's life seemed to depend on him. They hugged their daughter again, and the head of the family held out his hand, introducing himself. "My name is..." "And the woman hugging my daughter is my wife, Jessica." "And what is your name?" Alex replied. The man pulled his guest into a spacious room with a bookcase along the walls and seated him in a comfortable chair, explaining and genuinely happy to meet him. "Apparently, you are my daughter's companion, and I am very grateful to you for bringing her home. We've been waiting for her to come back for over 6 months. Jessica gusted to go after her. We guessed where our daughter had gone, but I forbade it. She had always been independent, and she needed to get to the point of wanting to come home on her own. Let the wife and daughter talk for a while in private. In the meantime, tell me honestly, are you serious about her?" Alex didn't lie and confessed. "Other than wanting to help your daughter, I had no other intentions. I met her yesterday by chance, and I felt sorry for her. I had time and opportunity, so I decided to do what I could. And that's not much, believe me." While Sergio and Alex had a successful conversation, the female half apparently managed to settle down, and the hostess invited the men to the table. "Come on, let's celebrate." We ordered from a nearby cafe and already had time to bring everything. The guest tried to refuse, but he was collectively persuaded to stay at the table. Jane kept touching her parents' hands, and then began to apologize to them. "Mama, Papa, forgive me if you can. I'm such a fool." Mom stood up and hugged her daughter, comforting her. "No, honey. Daddy and I are not angry. The only thing, we were very worried not knowing where you are and what is wrong with you. We were so looking forward to at least a call from you. If only you had kept quiet on the phone, it would have been easier for us. Or if you could not get over us, or if you could not get over yourself, you could at least call some of your friends and let them know how you are." The cab driver was beyond amazement. After all, judging from yesterday's story, the girl regularly called a friend of her foster mother, and he unrequitedly expressed his bewilderment out loud. "So, it seems she kept in touch with Anne on a regular basis. Your friend also forbade her to bother you. She said that it was not yet the time for communication, claimed that you almost cursed her here. It was painful to look at my mother. She was really shocked by this unexpected turn of events. The woman reported, in fact, she has been abroad for 5 months now, and since then we only communicate with her by email. She keeps calling me to visit, to let me unwind, to relax." The daughter looked just as shocked as her adoptive mother. "I don't understand. How could it be? Anne, the last time we talked a month ago, I was told that we visited you just the day before and that you were still not ready to accept me with an apology." The girl shifted her gaze from her mother to her father, who soon asked her daughter in a strange tone, "Call Anne. Find out how she thinks our apartment is doing. Put the phone on speakerphone." And soon a woman's voice filled with participation and tenderness sounded in the room. "I'm so glad to hear from you, my dear. Unfortunately, I can't give you any good news. Papa is still not well. He is in the hospital again, and the doctors even hint that his days are numbered. Mom doesn't want to hear from you. She just reminds me of you and immediately interrupts the conversation and moves on to another topic. So, girl, you just have to be patient a little longer. Sergio put his finger to his lips, urging his wife to be quiet, and the girl surprisingly coldly clarified. Anne, I'm sorry for being so specific. But when was the last time you were at my parents'? Is it actual news? The voice from the receiver answered after a long, sympathetic sigh. I visited just yesterday, so the news is up to date. There's no point in going back yet. Only Jessica will be in a hospital bed too. But do not despair. Call if anything. The girl said goodbye to her friend and turned to her father. How is it possible, she said so confidently, that you were in the hospital and so worried about Mom, who could also suffer because of my appearance? And she also lied about the fact that only yesterday she had been at our place. I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that she wasn't trying to help and support us at all, but was pursuing her own interests. And we don't know where she really is. My father asked his guest for a ride to a certain place so that the matter could be resolved. The cab driver, who himself was curious as to what kind of game his friend was up to with the family, did not hesitate to agree. When they arrived at the named address, the cab driver accompanied his passenger with an attentive look. The adoptive father might have been, in his opinion, a lawyer or a middle-ranking official, and the cab driver was leaning toward the second version after all. Not 15 minutes later, he was back in the cab. The man looked sad, and on the way home he shared his worries with the driver. Anyway, it looked like she was the one who had been involved in the daughter losing her head to this rascal. Now I found out that on the plane in the seat next to her was none other than my daughter's boyfriend. It's too unbelievable for a coincidence. What do you think? Yes, and it was all too easy to win favor with this Robert, playing on common interests and tastes. We had no idea that our girl had been charmed at the prompting of this sneaky woman. How deftly she kept her at a distance from us. How masterfully she played on her guilt. I don't even know how to tell it all now. The cab driver lingered in the family. The father, softening the news, explained to his wife and adopted daughter that the girlfriend's actions looked like a premeditated action. All the coincidences were too much at once in order to separate us. I just don't understand why she would do such a thing. Don't you have any thoughts on your so-called friend's motives? Other than self-interest, of course. It could have been easier to get the money out of us, but it was her idea of hurting us. The woman was confused. I can't figure it out. We didn't seem to have any big fights. I always helped in any way I could. Except she stopped talking, and her husband hurried her up. Well, when we first started going out, she tried to get me to give you to her. But after I said no, she seemed to calm down. But that 25-year-old resentment couldn't be the cause of the nightmare we'd been living in for months, could it? Taking advantage of the silence in the room, the man hurriedly said goodbye to the family. Well, I wish you all happiness. Goodbye. The head of the family once again thanked the cab driver for his concern, and the mother handed him a bag of portions from the cafe. These are not even open portions. Take it, don't refuse it. At least for a few snacks. Alex was returning to the town that had become his temporary refuge, and it was on his soul that he was glad that he had not passed by someone else's misfortune. Harmony be restored to their family in spite of all the trials. He himself desperately wanted to go to his hometown to his mother, but instead, overcoming a moment of weakness, the man contacted the control room, and he even managed to take a few orders, just to postpone the moment of return to the apartment, where no one was waiting for him. In the whirlwind of orders, he did not think of his family, but one evening, he received a call from the manager of the orphanage. Alex, hello. I'm calling to warn you. Here's the thing. An hour ago, a handsome man came to our shelter. He said he was the father of that girl, Jane. Remember? Brought all sorts of things as a thank you. I don't know what for. And then he asked for your phone number. I left it in my office on a plausible pretext, so I thought I'd call you and ask. You didn't have any problems with this passenger. Can I give your phone number to this unexpected guest?" The cab driver was surprised but answered, "It's okay, my dear. Thank you for your concern. By the way, it was talking to you that helped her decide to go to her parents. So think of all the gifts as payment for your psychological help. It is safe to give my number." He seemed like a great guy, and the fact that he brought things to the orphanage says a lot about him. Shortly after the cab driver finished talking to a longtime acquaintance, he got another call. It was Sergio, offering to meet at any convenient place and time. The cab driver, who was just starting a lull in his bookings, did not refuse. And soon the men were comfortably seated at a table in a cafe. Loud music played in the cafe and did not disturb the conversation. Sergio took the initiative and proposed, "Alex, how do you feel about changing jobs? It is impossible to be a cab driver forever. It is a dangerous profession from all sides, and not so harmless for health. I'm offering you a job with my firm. There's a good vacancy in the commercial department for a good man, and it is you who I see in that position." The cab driver was dumbfounded, but decided to admit it right away. "I myself am well aware that all my life I just cannot drive a cab. But you will take your own offer back when you find out about my criminal record just under the economic article. Of course you won't believe this, but I really wasn't in jail for anything. More precisely, for being too trusting. So thank you for your kindness, for the offer, but nothing will work out in terms of cooperation." However, the man suddenly became interested, very curious. "I just have a lot of good lawyers who can get justice, so it is quite possible to get full rehabilitation and even compensation." The cab driver confessed, "To be honest, I don't believe in justice anymore. My mother spent so much money trying to justify me that it's scary to remember. Only a good apartment had to be exchanged, and it was no use. I'm afraid nothing will work out now either, except dashed hopes." Except that he did not consider the character of his father, who was used to fighting for the truth. The man suggested, "How about this? You give me all the data on your case, but I still insist. In parallel, you take a leave of absence from your cab service and a paid internship. By the way, at my firm. If you like it, you'll get the job. If you don't like it, we'll part on friendly terms. I don't think you're risking anything, and neither am I. But you'll have a chance to make a difference." How? Wouldn't you agree? Alex couldn't resist such opportunities, so he answered, "It's a deal. Thank you very much. You're welcome for now." The man smiled. "My wife and I are indebted to you and the orphanage for bringing our daughter home. So that's just a small part of the thanks." Alex took the advice, and after a short conversation with the head of the cab service and the landlord of the rented apartment, he packed his bags and moved to the city, where a new job awaited him. His family helped him find a place to live, and it was as if the man had wings spread behind his back, that unfamiliar people unexpectedly took such an active part in his fate. After a preliminary call, he met with a lawyer. To the ex-taxi driver's surprise, his case was taken up by a charming woman, a blonde in a colored fake fur coat, who did not give the impression of a zealous connoisseur of the law. But this turned out to be a delusion. At the perplexed look, she explained, "Do not worry my appearance. An additional effect to divert the eyes of opponents. I'm just coming back from a meeting, and without unnecessary modesty boast. Justice won." Then the woman instantly adopted a businesslike tone and suggested to her new client, "How? Alex, let's see what you have in the case. And then you tell me everything calmly and honestly without any unpleasant moments. Let's see what ideas you have." He did not really believe that after years it would be real to restore justice. But Allah turned out to be a real fury in the fight for his case. She took all the circumstances of the case with such care that it was almost obvious to the man. His name, albeit with a delay, but still cleared of shame. even though things were not going very fast, but the result was worth the expectation. Alex, with incredible pride, told his mother that now they should not be ashamed of the sad fact in his biography. Mom, can you imagine Ola got justice? Not only that, I'm also entitled to monetary compensation, so you can look for a more comfortable apartment. The elderly woman was incredibly happy for her son, who seemed to have finally turned his luck. She confessed, "Oh, my son. And I was stupid and did not believe that it all worked out. I thought, again, to siphon money. Even if not from us this time, but from your boss. God bless him. But it all worked out. It's just a pity you didn't meet these wonderful people before. Otherwise, maybe my father would be alive and well now. Hey, what to argue now?" My mother was silent, and then she asked, "So, why don't you go back to your side of the family now? I missed you so much. Now no one will dare swear at you and reproach you." The former cab driver also had thoughts of returning to his hometown. The only thing he did not want to do was to betray the confidence of his boss, who had given him not the least position in his firm. He tried not to give his boss any reason to be displeased with him, and frankly feared his reaction to his subordinate's announcement of his decision to move. Occasionally meeting with Valia and dropping in on her father, he rejoiced at the transformation of the girl who had returned to the people who loved him. One day she said hello and asked, "Excuse me, please, I need your help again." More precisely, my biological mother. I think about her every day. Let her be who she is, but I'm ashamed that I'm all chocolate now, as they say. And she's probably going from water to bread, just to get booze in her. I don't want to go back to her. I tried it once, and it only hurt everyone. I'm afraid to go to my parents so I don't hurt them. That's why I decided to bother you. Do you think my biological mother could be placed in some kind of addiction treatment center? I'm working right now, and am willing to pay for services to bring her back to normal human form. I think the lovely Emily would be happy to hear from you too and provide all the help she can, and much more. And in case you're wondering my opinion, you don't have to hide your intentions from your parents. I think they will appreciate your generosity. You act like a real man, one who can only be proud. The girl thanked the former cab driver who had changed her life so drastically and contacted the orphanage. Soon the girl's biological mother was also affected by the change. As the director, who was used to doing everything with a quality sign, took over the case, there was every chance of successfully ridding the woman of her bad habits. The girl shared news with the former cab driver about how things were going with her birth mother. And despite his best efforts not to fall in love, the man fell under the charm of the sweet girl. They had already switched to you and occasionally went out to diners, laughing at conventions. He was uncomfortable being attracted to the daughter of the boss who had done so much for him. Deciding that he should move out of harm's way, the man made his way to his superior's house. Of course, the subordinate would not admit to him that the main motive for quitting, just begun to develop a career, was falling in love with his daughter, and told only that his mother needed care. He did not resent it, and even promised to give him the best characterization if necessary. Before he left, no matter how hard he tried to avoid it, he did meet the object of his affection. The girl, noticing him at the end of the corridor, caught up with him almost at a run and held him by the sleeve of his jacket, forcing him to turn to her and linger more than was necessary for a simple greeting. "Alex, is it me, or are you hiding from me?" The man had no choice but to lie without blinking an eye. "Hello. It's just your imagination. It's just that I'm getting ready to move and have to do almost everything on the run. So excuse me if somewhere maybe I ran past without stopping." The sly squint of his eyes clearly made it clear that the girl did not believe him one bit, so she asked a new provocative question. "What? And now that I caught you by the sleeve, you didn't turn around on purpose when you noticed me?" Alex tried to move the conversation to a neutral topic and inquired, "How is your birth mother doing?" What does the supervisor say? Can we get her out of rehab soon? The snowflakes in the girl's eyes instantly disappeared. She admitted that things were not going too smoothly in freeing her relative from her vices, and added, "That's probably also why you're avoiding me, because you're afraid of bad heredity." Alex was so indignant that he involuntarily burst out, "How stupid you are. You look like an angel, and you've got a brilliant upbringing. Beautiful, clever girl. And where did all this insecurity come from?" The girl blushed. She certainly caught the sympathy. But before, he had never given her even such disguised compliments, no longer almost like simple, friendly support, and the girl was afraid to trust the man again. But she felt a reciprocal attraction to the man, so she held his sleeve and suggested, "My mom is having an anniversary celebration next weekend. And if you're wondering how my wandering story ends, by all means come." The man couldn't refuse. It turned out that he was in for a surprise. A friend of the girl's biological mother came to the party. "And I'm very glad that you found time to visit me. And to make sure you're allowed to finish, please answer the phone." The friend, who came from abroad, brushed off and was about to turn off her smartphone completely when Valia called her from behind. "Why do not you answer me? I just want to know the news. Can I go home? Or am I still cursed with long winter evenings?" Even the tan could not hide the sudden whiteness of her guest's cheeks. But she tried to look happy, saving her face. "Darling, you're here. What are you doing here? How glad I am that your parents found the strength to forgive you and you are finally back together. What a moment. Let's have some fun to celebrate." She slapped her forehead and laughed. "I forgot my present in the car. Just a second, I'll get it." She couldn't get through the cordon of men at the door, though. Chuckling, she hurried to the emergency exit, but her maneuver, like a cowardly flight, interrupted the birthday girl. She asked, "Explain, please. Why do you hate me so much that you even decided to separate with his daughter? I just once did not give in to you, and you're for me to come up with the test, which would not wish the enemy. Just answer me why." Panic flashed across the guest's face, but she admitted that the reason was simple jealousy. "You've always been the best, and I'm always in the background. You think it's easy to always fall short of the ideal. I have long been looking for your weak spot, and since your spouse really turned out to be grateful, I decided to strike through his daughter. I found the catcher. And then it was a matter of technique. You can't prove my guilt, and you can kiss your money goodbye." But Anne was wrong. Thanks to the connections of his father, Robert was extradited to his homeland, and together with his accomplice, he was under investigation. A little later, they were sentenced. The couple's relationship grew more and more affectionate with each passing day. Of course, this did not go unnoticed for long, for the parents now watched closely every change in the mood of their child. The girl believed in love again, and it was impossible not to notice it. The man already had his workbook in hand when his boss invited him into the office, where his wife and daughter were already there. Smiling, he said, I never thought I'd ever be in that role. But you seem to be too decent. My wife and I noticed a long time ago that you had a soft spot for our daughter, and you were trying to keep your feelings to yourself. Well, we don't mind the two of you going out. We even agree if the two of you go to your homeland. Think it over. Where would you feel more comfortable? We agree in advance to whatever you decide." The couple could not believe their happiness, and after a visit to their hometown, to the man's mother, they decided to take her to live with them and move closer to the girl's foster parents. This decision suited everyone without exception.